Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the FamVestor Podcast. I'm your host, Sonny Burns.
And I'm your co-host, Sunmarie Burns.
Today's super excited, and we know we always...
What was it?
I'm using this. I know we always say this, but no, it's a really great episode, especially for those who are concerned about coronavirus. We do go into that. If you're listening to this 2 years later and you forgot about coronavirus, it was a thing circa March 24th, 2020, when this episode was recorded. But anyway, we talked with Steve Rozenberg. You know, he's been through it all since he was an investor, around the 9/11, 2001 time frame. So he's lived through several recessions. He's talked about SARS. He talked about H1N1. Talked about all these different things that kind of affected the economy and he lived through. But some cool things about him is he is still a full-time commercial airline pilot through it all since investing in 2001. And he's done a lot. He has dozens of rental properties. He's flipped. He's wholesaled. And he's in the Houston, Texas area. But he also managed to create a multi-million-dollar property management business. Right. And he runs 3 podcasts. Anything you want to add there, Sunmarie?
He's recently written a book about his story and the journey that life has taken him in and how it got him into entrepreneurship. And he shares a lot in this episode about passing on your entrepreneurial knowledge to your children, especially in his situation to his son. And It's a really inspiring and eye-opening example of how we can impact our children or our spouses, for the better.
So without even grooming him, his 14-year-old son reached out to him, without coaching or anything and said, I want to buy a rental property. And he goes into the story of how his 14-year-old bought a rental property. So that was super cool. Something that got my ears perked. Our son has a Roth IRA. I'm like, maybe I can buy a self-directed rental property in his IRA in his teens. That would be so cool. So anyway, it's definitely a cool story of, aligning with your spouse, aligning with your family, and creating a cool FamVestor life.
Right.
So without further ado, let's get to the show.
You're listening to the FamVestor Podcast. If you're looking to raise your family with intention, gain financial independence, and live a life of true freedom, you're in the right place. Join us as we explore together how to create thriving families, because strong families are the cornerstone for a world at peace.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the FamVestor Podcast. I'm excited today to have Steve Rozenberg. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Steve, I'm curious to kind of dig more into your backstory. We talk about pivoting and being agile. And, in this environment right now, coronavirus just hitting us, people losing their jobs. I want to circle back to 9/11 when you first lost your job. And also even the fact that you just started real estate investing, and now you've flipped hundreds of properties. You have a multi-million-dollar property management business. And you didn't buy your first property till 30. If you can kind of just circle back in terms of your origin story, in terms of family, finance, freedom, where you got started with investing, can you just bring the listeners to where you were at?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I got hired with the airlines, I was the second youngest person hired at Continental Airlines. Wow. I was hired at 25 years old. The average age is 35.
Wow.
Not because I'm very smart. I just happened to be the right person in the right place. I tell people, and I'm a very, very focused and determined person. And that just is what bubbled up. It was one of those things that I didn't know I couldn't do it, so I did it. And so I got hired at the airline. My wife and I just got married right when I was hired. We actually moved to Guam. So I was living in Guam for about 3.5 years with my wife, living in the South Pacific, flying all over Australia, Asia, all the South Pacific islands. And I literally was living the life that I always wanted to have. I was an airline pilot. I was in my 20s. I was married, very happy. My wife and I were traveling all over the world. And I used to tell her, I don't know why anyone would do anything else. Like, why would somebody have another job? Like, I'd fly with pilots. They'd have like the coin-operated arcades and car washes and real estate. And I'm thinking, this is a great job. Like, we have a career like this. We're at a pinnacle. Why would you do anything else?
Right.
And I thought in my mind that I had the best job in the world. I really, really enjoyed it. And up until September 10th of 2001, I did have the best job in the world. And I had probably, in my mind, the most safe, secure job in the world. As we all know, you guys being in New York, 9/11 obviously hit 2001, a huge tragedy. And the way I looked at the world on September 12th was much different, as many people, as I did on September 10th.
Right.
And September 13th was my day of reckoning, because that was the day that my safe, secure job evaporated. And I was served a furlough notice that basically said, we don't think we need you. You're not as important as you may think you are. And within 90 to 120 days, you possibly could be out of a job. And we don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to protect the shareholders of the company, and we're going to protect the liquidity of the company, and we're going to shed as much weight as we can as quickly as possible. Now, to their defense, that is their job. That is why board of directors exist, to protect the solvency of a company.
Right.
And my challenge is that I had this illusion that I had a job that would never be touched and it was safe and secure forever.
Right.
What I realized was that the safe, secure job and the focus and intention that I had to be an airline pilot and all the years of studying was only good if you were going to be an airline pilot.
Right.
Outside of being an airline pilot, I was not qualified to drive a truck. I had no computer skills. I was unhireable, really. I remember looking in the want ads thinking, unless I'm flying a metal tube around the sky, I really can't do anything else. And there was probably 50 to 100,000 other airline pilots that were about to be on the street as well.
Wow.
And this was a worldwide thing. So it wasn't like just me in Houston, Texas or somewhere else. This was a world, as many people know. And you feel very vulnerable because all of a sudden you realize I can't do anything else. Like, I don't know what I would do.
Right.
And I'm so focused on being a specialist in a field of flying an airplane. That's great in the airplane world, but outside of that, it's useless.
Right.
So I really realized how vulnerable I put myself and the position that I put myself. So out of 6,000 pilots, they furloughed, I think it was about 1,000 or 1,100 of us. And I became 30 from the bottom of getting furloughed. So I never actually lost my job, but I was skimming the bottom of this thing. I remember I got put on reserve, which is at the bottom. I was flying out of Newark and out of Cleveland. And I remember I couldn't complain because I had a job. So it's hard for you to complain about being on call. I'm in this place called the Ironbound in Newark, and I'm in a crash pad. And,
I grew up in Newark. I know it.
So I'm in the Ironbound, and I'm going through the snow with my roller, and I'm just thinking, man, this sucks. But I'm like, and then you think like it could always be worse. So I realized that I needed to do something to protect myself for the future that I had control over, not that someone else had control over my destiny.
Right.
And so I started trying to understand, what is it that people do that are wealthy? Like, I had no idea, because all I had done my whole life was try to be a pilot. That's all I ever wanted to do. And that's what I was doing.
Right.
So as I started learning, there was a lot of people I noticed that had wealth that were tied to real estate. And I thought, okay, well, I know a lot of pilots do real estate. Maybe I'll look into this. So I started reading books as much as I could read. And just to date myself, there was no YouTube. I had to go to the library. So I had to get a library card, and I would go in my uniform and I'd pick up the books and I'd reserve them, and they'd let me know, and I'd get my library card, library books. And so I started learning, and I started reading about a book a week.
Wow.
And I just tore into this with the same tenacity that I had with everything else that I did growing up. And that's just the type of person, my DNA, that I am. And I realized that there was like this whole society of real estate that I knew nothing about. And there was terms like ROI, cash on cash, and all these acronyms. And I was just like, I felt like I had jumped into a race in the middle of the third round of 4 total, thinking like, I have no idea what's going on. And all these people know this. And I'm thinking, how do I not know these things? And it just made me want to get better,
Right. Because, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I know. When we first got into it too, I'm like, all these terms and all these words.
These acronyms,
it's like
ROI,
I'm in a physics
cash
class or something.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking like, I'd never heard of these. Like, I know airplane numbers, I know flying, I know aerodynamics. I don't know anything about this.
Right.
And what I realized was a lot of these people were successful because they were taking action at the end of it.
Right.
And so what I ended up doing is I ended up reading a lot, as much as I could. I got involved in what was called wholesaling. At the time, it wasn't called that, but I took a lot of classes on learning how to speak and negotiate and communicate, which served me very well. I did very well with that. I ended up buying an apartment complex with the money that I made. Wow. And that kind of got me down the path of owning real estate and doing all that. And I forever have been, since that day, since that 9/11, I had told myself that I would never, ever put myself or my family in that vulnerable position that I could not dictate myself. So I'm a forever student. And I realize a lot of us, probably many people, until they get that tragedy or put their hand on that stove, you think like, okay, I've got a job, I'm secure, I'm good.
Right.
Until that gets ripped away from you. And then you realize the one thing that you had that you don't have anymore is time. And so I've always told myself, I will never allow myself to get put in that position of being vulnerable if I can help it and I can dictate it. And so that's why I'm a huge believer in being coached and mentored, and, you know, my son, alignment with the family. And it's just something you've got to do as a unit to make sure that you're moving along and educating. Because if I am educating myself and I'm going down this tangent of ideas, and my wife is like, where are you going? What are you doing? And there's no alignment, that's a problem, right? And anyone who's probably an entrepreneur has done something, myself included. If you don't do that communication, it's like sand, and then it becomes a rock, and then it becomes a little bit of and then it becomes this huge chasm between both parties, and it becomes a point of contention.
Right. And
so I've just learned that there's a bigger picture, and yes, there are tough times and everything like that. But what I've learned is it's worth the ride. Because if you don't, the ulterior, when I remember when they started cutting pensions and contracts, and they were abrogating all the pilot contracts, and there were guys that were 58 years old. And as a pilot, you have a mandatory retirement. At the time, it was 60. It's now 65. But there were guys that were basically leaving in a year saying, I don't have any retirement. It's all gone. And they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And there were guys that were retired that were getting annuity payments. They were 65, 70 years old. And they just said, sorry, we're not giving you this anymore. Good luck.
Wow.
So I just thought to myself, man, I would hate to be in that position. I just remember having conversations with those pilots in the cockpit thinking, I do not want to be like these guys. They had a great career, a great job, and they stopped learning and they put themselves in that position. So that's a roundabout way of my story.
No, I mean, I think you bring up a lot of good points, a lot of things to consider, you know, not having that single-minded mindset, but really making yourself a lifelong student, educating yourself in different ways that you can, you know, work and get to the same end point, you know, where you're trying to save for the future and so forth. And, you know, differentiating what you do is so important, you know, not to be just hooked on one thing. Because as you said, you know, the world changes, unforeseen circumstances can happen that could turn your world upside down. So it's so important to have a bunch of things going for you. And I also really like the point you brought up about being on the same page with your wife through it all. I've seen time and time again, you know, a lot of people who get interested in real estate or really any kind of financial independence mindset. And they say, you know, I'm really passionate about this, but my wife or my husband, they don't really, you know, understand it. They're not into it. It's just my thing. And I feel like, as you mentioned, it's like the sand analogy. It's going to grind you too much at a certain point, especially when you start making high stakes decisions that involve finances that affect both of you in a partnership. You know, you got to be on the same page with the family in your life. So I like that you mentioned that point as well.
Yeah, I can tell you, I mean, I did not do it correctly the first time when I was buying properties. And I even wrote a book on I'm a published author. I wrote a book on my story. And, you know, I was buying properties that my wife didn't agree with, me and a business partner, and she was doing the books, and I kept buying them thinking that I could fix the situation. And they were properties that were not right. for the strategy we had. And I kept thinking that if I buy more of them, it would fix the problem. She was looking at the numbers saying, this is not working. What you are doing is not working. And it got to the point, I think we had about 35 houses that were just bad properties. And she said, if you buy another one, it better be nice because you will be living in it. You need to stop. She's like, you suck at buying houses. You need to stop what you're doing because what you're doing is not fixing the situation. And I had that tunnel vision and, I just kept thinking, I can fix this. I can fix this because I put myself into it. And so finally, when I kind of relented and said, you know what, you're right. Like I need to stop. And so what I learned from that lesson, and I mean, it was to the point that me and my business partner would buy a house and I would slip the HUD statement into the file thinking she wouldn't notice. And all of a sudden she'd be like, what's this extra account? And I'm like, oh yeah, we bought another property. Didn't I tell you? And she, she's running the books. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I just kept thinking I could fix this, And I felt almost like an addict. I was trying to fix the situation. So when we started our business of managing properties, as you said, we took a business from nothing and built it up to 1,000 properties and sold it. But as we did that, one of the things that we did is we got a business coach because we failed so miserably at buying wrong properties. We thought we need to get a coach. One of the things the coach did, which was probably the best thing he could have done, is he always made sure that we had an alignment with our wives. And the alignment was that we would actually go in with the coach once a year with our wives, my wife and my business partner and his wife, and we would have that discussion of what the expectations are, where the business is at, where the business is going, what is the possible upsides, what are the possible downsides. And then what we did is, as any business has a board of directors, just like if you guys, whatever you do, you have a business and there should be a board of directors. Every quarter, we had a board of directors meeting where we had minutes, we had updates, and that was with our wives. So we always brought our wives into the conversation. So we didn't ask them to be involved, but they knew what was going on and there was alignment. And I tell people all the time that if you are buying rentals or whatever you're doing, whatever your business is, that alignment is key because you're selling normally. The husband or the wife is selling the spouse or the significant other on the dream,
right? Never
the dark side, never the worst case scenario.
Right.
But we all know it's going to happen. Yeah. We all know that there is going to be a bad day. There is going to rain. And if you don't bring that in, normally it's like, I thought this was a hobby. I didn't know that you were going to be doing this for 2 years. And now you're telling me we have to take $10,000 of our own savings and put a roof on this house. No, I'm not doing that.
Right.
And normally it's because there's a lack of communication between partners and children. I mean, if you want them to reap the rewards of what you're doing, they should also understand the risk. And I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we only want to show the rosy picture and we don't want to give the harsh reality because we don't want to scare anyone because our brains are sense to protect ourselves, and by protecting ourselves we say no if we don't like the idea. And so I think it's something that I always tell people when I've mentored people, helped people, and I tell them, I said, as entrepreneurs we sometimes are the most selfish people. And the reason I say that is we take all this information, we take courses, we read books, we go to seminars, and we have all this information, but we never pass it on to our significant others, and we never pass it down to our children. You may give them the results of what you've done, but you're not actually showing them how to do what you do to create their quote unquote why. And if you don't show them how to create their why, to me, it's selfish because you're not giving them the tools to succeed.
Right.
And I think that's something that a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we get so busy being busy, we forget that there's something about giving back and helping, and especially with your own family, to be able to keep that unit together.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an awesome point you bring up because, I feel like far too often, we feel, as entrepreneurs, we feel, we're working hard, we're successful, we're providing for our family monetarily, but everything else, you're not teaching the spouse, you're not teaching the the kids how to sustain this. And, you know, maybe they do have this inheritance at some point, but if you didn't teach them the tools, they're just going to blow it. And then you are stuck at the end of it feeling like a failure with these children who don't know how to manage their money or manage their lives, essentially. And I think that's such an important, powerful point. And that was another reason why we were so excited to have you on this podcast, because I know that your son has gone ahead at the age of now 16, or I think even a few years ago, he bought his first rental property. If you can walk us through how that got started and just the whole process and what he thinks of the whole process of being a landlord now.
My son, without knowing it or wanting it, became very famous because of what happened. So and I wish I could say that was kind of my eye-opening moment, to be honest with you, because I wish I could say that I had groomed him to think like this, because I didn't. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of things, it's kind of through trial and error and accident and stuff like that. And so I do a lot of podcast shows. I've had a lot of shows. I speak on stages all over the world. And so he knows this, and he sometimes comes with me when I speak at events and stuff. And I never really thought that he would be paying attention to what I'm doing. Right. You know, in a business meeting, I would bring him with me. I listen to audio books and podcast shows nonstop in my car, going to the gym, that he comes with me. I don't think about it. He's just in the car with me. Right. And so one day I listened to like Grant Cardone or Andy Frisella and some of these other guys. Mm-hmm. And one day I was taking him somewhere, and he had a friend in the car. And to me, I don't care who's in the car. I'm listening to my stuff. And so I'm listening to one of the podcast shows, and my son, his name is Jet. And his friend is in the car, and his friend says, "Hey, Jet, is this the guy that you were telling me about?" Meaning the podcast show. Uh-huh. And my son kind of nods his head, not really acknowledging me, but nods his head. And I thought to myself, okay. I didn't really think that he would notice what I listened to, because, you don't, kids are just sitting there looking out the window or doing whatever. Right. And so a little bit shortly after that, he comes to me, and he's 14 at the time. And he says, "Dad, I want to buy a rental property." And I was like, totally caught off guard. And I said, I'm like, "Well, you can't, like, how? Like, how are you going to, like, what do you mean?" I said, he goes, I want a rental. And I said, "Well, what do you mean you want a rental property?" He says, "Well, you have rental properties." I said, "Yeah." And he says, "And you get money from those rental properties?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I want a rental property for passive income." Wow. Okay. So I'm like, I said, "Well, you don't have any money for a rental property." And he says, "Yeah, I've got about $10,000 saved up." And I'm like, "Excuse me?" I said, "How'd you get $10,000?
What bank did you steal?"
Yeah. He says, "Well, I've been saving money, and grandma's giving me money, and I've been putting it aside." And I said, "Well," I said, $10,000 is not enough to buy a house." Mm-hmm. And so he says, so he's quiet and he thinks about it, and he goes, "Well, how much do I need?" And I said, "At least double." I said, "You need at least double of that. Houses in Houston, obviously less than New York. House in Houston, maybe somewhere between 140 and 180 price point for a good rental property." Right. And I said, "Well, you're going to need at least double that." And he goes, so he's asking me questions. I'm thinking it's pretty smart of him, Yeah. And he says, "Well, how do I get more money?" And I said, "You could save." And he says, "Well, I'm 14 now. That means I'll be 28. And I'm like, "Yeah, that's right." And he says, "Well, that's too long for me to wait." And I said, "Yeah, I agree." And some of this was over a couple of days. We had a couple day conversation. So he comes back and he says, "Well, is there another way that I could do it?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "There is another way." And I'm thinking he's pretty smart. He's asking me some smart questions, but I'm not giving him anything, right? I'm making him work for it.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
And I said, he said, "What's the other way?" And I said, "Well, you can create a partner. You can get a partner." He said, "Well, what's that?" I said, "Well, you go in halves with someone." He says, like how? And I said, "Well, you put up half and the other person puts up half, and you both own it equally, and it's called a partnership." Mm-hmm. And he says, "Okay." He goes, "So I can buy a house if I go in half and I get someone else, they go in half, and I can own the house." And I said, "Well, not really, because you have what's called a mortgage." So you got to remember, when you're talking to someone at that age, they don't understand mortgages and taxes and deeds. And, so I'm like, he's like, "I don't understand. Like, you said if I go in halves, I would have the house." I'm like, "You would have the down payment for a house." Right. So I'm like, okay, I got to dig a little bit deeper with him. So he comes back and he says, "Okay, would you go in partnership with me?" And I'm like, "What's the deal?" And he's like, "Well, we go 50-50. And I'm like, well, I'm like, you got to sell me on the deal. I'm like, you got to sell me. I go, because what do you bring to the table? What do I bring to the table? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, I bring $10,000. I'm like, I get $10,000 anywhere. So he's like, Dad, come on. And I'm like, well, this is a business deal. We're going to talk business.
Yeah.
So we sit down and I said, okay, let me explain to you how appreciation works and cash flow. And so I write down all the stuff about cash flow, debt pay down, appreciation. And I show them how different parts of the country, like the West Coast and East Coast, appreciate faster than the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And we do this whole elaborate thing. And so I give them that. I'm like, you need to make sure you understand this. I also write down debt servicing, mortgage payments, taxes. So he takes that, he goes up, and about a week or so later, I go into his room and it's up on his wall. Oh, and he's actually been looking at it. And I'm like, okay, pretty impressive, Yeah. So he comes back to me. He's like, okay, Dad, I think I want to move forward on this. I said, okay. I said, now you have to find the deal. I said, I will get the deal. I will bring you the deals, but you have to tell me why it makes sense for us to move forward on the deal. Like, you got to crunch the numbers on it.
Some homework lesson.
So he's like, how do I do that? I'm like, that's a you problem. That's not a me problem. I'm like, you got to figure it out.
Wow.
So I'm like, maybe you could ask Mom, you could ask me, but I'm like, you have to ask me. I'm not gonna help you. You've got to come to me, and you have to tell me why this makes sense or doesn't, and let me know. That. So anyway, so I reach out to some people that I know in the real estate industry, and I'm like, I'm looking for a deal that's a done deal. I don't want to rehab because I don't want him to buy a problem. Right. I want him to get something because I want him to understand that, for me, at least how I think is, as owning real estate is a business owner. And as a business owner, you have teams of doing things. You don't do it yourself. That's just my philosophy in owning real estate, especially for a 14-year-old that, doesn't understand that. Mm-hmm. So we end up finding a deal, and we go in halves. He gets the house. We hand it over to the management company, which I own, but we're a client. Mm-hmm. We bought the house for $159. It was worth $180. Mm-hmm. But the caveat to it was 100% done. Mm-hmm. Nothing needed at all, completely rehabbed. We rented it a week later for like awesome. $1,600 a month.
Wow.
Been rented ever since, right?
Wow.
So he's understanding the cash flow. Every amount that he gets, 40% he puts back in to reinvest. Mm-hmm. 60% he gets to keep for cash flow. Mm. And what's interesting is I get a lot of people that say, how did he do it? How did he get a loan?
Yeah.
How did he come up with $10,000? And they ask me all the hows. Mm-hmm. And what I explain to people is, you're asking me the wrong question. Mm. You should be asking me why. Mm-hmm. Why did he want to own a rental?
Right.
Why does he want to buy more rentals? Why is he more business astute now than he was before? Mm. The how is easy. Getting the deal and getting a loan, you get a partner. Mm-hmm. I got the loan, right? That's the easy part, right? That's like a hard money lender or whatever you want to call it. It's right. The why. How do you teach him to want it? That's right. The hard part. And so he now does other business transactions. He takes the cash flow, and we had him on. I've got a podcast show that I do, and we had him on my podcast show, me and the other announcer. And so he asked him, the co-host asked him, he said, what have you learned from this? And he said, you know what I've learned the most, which I didn't even know. He said, I've learned how to look at other opportunities that I would have never have noticed had I never understood this deal. Mm. So he says, now I see other possible transactions and other possible deals that I would have never paid attention to before.
Interesting.
And I thought, so now like he's really into knives. He flips these knives, but he buys them and sells them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so he's buying and selling them, and he's doing that. So he's getting an understanding of how money works.
Right.
And again, I wish I could say I created this. I guess in a way I did, but it wasn't intentional that I sat him down and said, you're going to learn this. Mm-hmm. Kind of through osmosis. Yeah. So that's the story of my son.
Right.
That's awesome.
I love a point you bring up, is that, we all have these various things that we're doing in our business. We're not always aware of the fact that our children are watching and listening and learning. And I feel like a lot of times we put them in a box and we think, oh, they're too little to really understand any of what's going on. I'm not going to burden them with this grown-up stuff. But really, we're doing ourselves a disservice in that way. The younger you start, the earlier they can learn an awareness and a mindset about business, which is so key to life, and so many people actually never learn that skill. some may go their whole lives without really getting astute with business. Others may discover it in their late 30s, or late 20s, when they realize they're in the workforce. And as you mentioned before, they realize, I am not indispensable. I really need to come up with a more creative portfolio. But to get that as a young child, just the way it can impact the way you view the world and how to go about living your life is huge in terms of choosing your educational choices later in the future and so forth. So I think that that's so powerful that you could mentor your son through this process. It's a real life learning experience for him. I mean, he's only 14 and he's gaining this knowledge that most people never even have ever in their life.
Yeah. And, one of the things I try to explain to people is that, I get a lot of people that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but you've got to be careful the message that you send to your children. So a lot of people have rental properties and they're like, oh, I've got a kid that I can use as free labor, right? They'll go out and sweep this and sweep that. Well, and again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with doing this, or if you own a business and you have them do extra work, that's great. But what are you doing? You're teaching them to be a worker and you're teaching them to be an employee.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with doing that, but how about teaching them the business side of it? Because once they grow up, what have you taught them to do?
Right.
You've taught them how to work hard, not necessarily work smart. Yeah. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I think there's something to be said about, hard work and be well-rounded. However, careful the message that you're giving the child, because you are teaching them that, hey, your worth is to work for money. And I don't know that that's the right message, because a lot of times people they put money up on a pedestal, and money is just a belief. I know a lot of people that have zero money and they're very rich in their hearts and they're very rich people.
Right.
Yeah.
And vice versa. We all know people that are very wealthy that are empty inside. It's not the money, but it's the value you put on it. And if we put a lot of value and say it's so much per hour that I'm going to pay you to sweep the floors, what message are we teaching them? And is the time better spent teaching them the intellectual side of owning and running a business than the working side? Just a thought.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I get a lot of questions about teaching, young kids about hunger. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs grew up with a hunger to earn more, to create more and become wealthy. And a lot of the, children maybe are in a better place and don't have that same hunger, don't have that same urgency to create, a success or financial success for themselves. I'm wondering, did you do anything differently for your son, or he just really just kind of grew that from osmosis, or was there any intentionality there about creating that want for success?
No real intention. I think it's just by being, my wife and I are both pretty hard-charging, hard-working people. We both have very strong work ethics. And so I think that he just kind of got that from us. Okay. But, look, he's a teenager. He likes doing teenage things, and we don't want to deprive him of that. But we also try to be very cognizant of what he's doing and where he's going, and thinking things through and trying to have adult conversations with him.
Right.
While at the same time peppering that with him being a teenager and allowing that, coming of age conversations to happen and have. So I think that, look, up until the time of me having 9/11, I was not a hungry entrepreneur.
Right.
And it's one of those things, people do what they have to, not what they should. Right. I had to make a decision and I had to change. Right. It's like people that should stop smoking, and then people who get lung cancer and have to stop smoking.
Right.
There is a difference in their why as to why they are stopping. And I think a lot of times, and I was one of them, I was one of those people that was about to be out of a job. My why got elevated very, very quickly as to learning real estate. If it was one of those hey, Steve, you should learn real estate. Yeah, one day I want to buy a rental property.
Right.
That turned into a must.
Right.
And that must is what drove me. So I don't know how to instill that in people other than, them either having their own drive, or when that should becomes a must.
Nice. And just one last question about your son. I'm interested in college. What, he's 16, he's in high school now. What is he thinking, to go the traditional employment route? Is he thinking to maybe buy more rental properties and grow? What is the current mindset there and your conversations with him?
He does want to get more rental properties. I think that's a good and bad, because now that he sees the cash flow coming in, and we've had the conversation. I am, even though I went to, college and as a pilot, my wife, she's an engineer. Mm-hmm. She went to college. We're both, advocates of college, but I also don't think college is for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think, I'm not a huge fan to say that college will make you successful. I think we all know the stories of people who come out of college and they're not successable. And so I'm very cautious to put him in that line. I think real estate, if he buys more rental properties and goes down that path, I do firmly believe that real estate will give him the ability to do whatever he wants. If he wants to be a welder, if he wants to own a plumbing business, if he wants to do something, he seems to be gravitating towards a business model. Although right now when I try to help him, he's got a business class or social media. I'm like, hey, he's like, no, I don't want your help. Don't get away. I'm like, but I think
he's at that age.
But yeah, he's at that age. He's 16 years old. But I think what he sees is, especially, he got a very rare glimpse of seeing us create a business and take it all the way to exit and sell the company. And now I am now with the new company, Mind Property Management, as their VP of education. So he's seen me continue, and he sees me speaking, in Australia and other stuff. So he sees a different view, I think, than most people. But I think he also realizes I don't want him to always think that he has to go and get a career job to do something, because if he is smart enough, I think entrepreneurs sometimes are the happiest and can be the most successful if they understand that right mixture of combination.
Right. So just to understand your background here, so you purchased a lot of properties, but you don't self-manage. You hand them over to property management. Do you run the property management business yourself, or do you have a property management business that you align with your deals?
So I owned a property management company. And so when we had the company, we recently sold it to Mind Property Management. Okay. When we had the company ourselves, we were managing about 1,000 properties.
Wow.
And we had about 19 employees. About 50% of our employees were virtual assistants in Mexico. And I am a big believer in understanding right person, right seat, and understanding leverage of systems and best use of people's time. And so a lot of people have a hard time understanding that just because they own the business, just because they started the company, that does not mean that they're the right person to do certain tasks.
Right.
And maybe that's not the best use of their time per hour or their right skill set. And so I'm a huge believer in leveraging out things that I'm not good at to other people so that I can focus on what I am good at.
Very interesting. Okay.
So I know, as a property manager, you have a lot of experience or owning a property management company and, landlording, and you have your own podcast, Landlord Survival, and a number of other podcasts as well. But, times I feel like a lot of landlords are concerned right now with coronavirus and, if tenants lose their jobs, rent checks stop coming in. Any advice you would have in this current time for especially like small-time landlords or even property managers?
Yeah, I do. I've probably been on 1 to 2 podcasts every day, Bigger Pockets, another one. So yes, I do have some advice. The one thing I would say, first of all, is at the root of what we do as investors, whether you have one property or you have 50, you own a business, right? That is the definition of a business. Whether people treat it like a business or not, that is up for discussion, obviously. But I would say the first thing you have to remember is a business does not run on fear and emotion. It runs off facts and data. So you being an engineer, you can relate to the fact that the numbers dictate the story. The data dictates the story. And so a lot of people get reactionary out of fear and emotion because of what they hear or what they think, because we always go, 70% of our thoughts are negative. So whenever we hear negative information, we align with that because it aligns with our thinking.
Interesting.
The data and the facts are what are contrarian. So if you looked at data and facts, it is not the same as what the fear and emotions are telling us on the news, right? So my point is that don't let fear and emotion drive a business decision. Let facts and data do that. Now, with that being said, as an investor, I think a lot of investors are going to realize that they probably did not have correct business strategies and the right business model set up for this type of contingency, meaning capital reserves, contingency plans, maybe exit strategies, maybe access to cash, which should be part of a business plan. Now, there will be some people, and I know many people during the 2008 recession that became very, very wealthy because they were educated, they were knowledgeable, they looked at the facts, and the data dictated that it was made more sense to purchase properties or get rid of properties or whatever.
Right.
The people that made decisions off of fear and emotion or bad business practices and forced them to were normally the ones who lost the most. So my advice to people, because this is a very fast, it's an ever-changing situation, the best thing you could do is, and I use my experience from flying airplanes, right? When you have an emergency, when you're flying an airplane, the first thing that you do is you take a breath and you assess the situation of what's going on, right? So this is, you're in the air, lose an engine, take a breath. Next, you have to figure out who's flying the airplane, who's in control of the situation. So for you guys, husband and wife, who has what task? Okay, I'm doing this, you are doing that. We're not both doing this.
Right.
So divide the tasks up and decide who is doing what. The next is identify the problem. What actually is the problem? A lot of things going on right now. There's a lot of noise, but if you boil down the problem, it may be a peanut size of what the problem, and it's exasperated out, right? The ripple effect, the media. Once you identify the problem, don't go to the problem, go to the solution. Focus on the solution, not the problem. And so like in hockey, you go to where the puck's going to be, not where the puck's at, right? Same thing here. Don't go to the problem and focus on the problem. Go to where the solution is. Focus on the solution. So come up with solutions. Don't worry that the problem has already happened and is in the rear view mirror. The solution is the windshield in front of you. That's where you're going.
Right.
A lot of people are driving, staring at the rock behind them through the rear view mirror. Last thing you have to do is communicate with everyone else involved, whether it's your business partner, your spouse, your family. Communicate your residents. Communication is one of the most misused and misplaced things. You don't communicate what is going on. So I would say if you were going to do that, number one, take a breath, calm down. Next, somebody divide the rules and the roles, fly the airplane. Next is identify the problem, go to the solution, and then communicate it out. That's how I'm trained. That's how I look at problems. Whenever a problem happens, whatever it is, my mind, and it's from years of being trained from Boeing, my mind automatically slows down. And it's like, okay, all of a sudden, you know what? Just slow down and take a breath. And who's doing what? And now let's start identifying it and working solutions.
Wow.
And I think a lot of people get caught up in you know, I'm sure you probably talk to people as I do. They're just going in a circle. They never even leave the subdivision because they're so busy driving in circles. And you're like, you haven't even gone anywhere. You told me this drama. Like if you did not watch the news, like I don't watch the news, right? If you don't watch the news, you really don't know much of what's going on. And I'm not saying don't be informed.
Right.
There's a difference between knowing fact and knowing being engulfed in the drama. And I think that's where a lot of people, you know, emotions, people make decisions on emotion and then they back it up with fact.
Right.
The problem is sometimes once you make that decision on emotion, it's too late.
Right.
And you've already put yourself in a bad position. Right. So
no,
I'm not sure if that helps, but that's my assessment of what's going on.
No, I thought that was really great advice, and I think, you know,
it's fantastic. Yeah.
Just.
I mean, I think like you said, it's very easy to get caught up on the problem and to just put on the blinders and run in circles around the problem. I'm even guilty of that sometimes.
Every turn you take, someone else is talking about it.
Absolutely.
But then you look at the facts and figures, and you can set yourself straight and really just take that breath to align yourself and find out what is the problem, and instead of focusing on that, focus on the solution, how to get to where you want to be.
Yeah, and more importantly, it's like, okay, all this stuff going on. Okay, is it affecting me? First of all, that's the first one. Does this even affect me and my rental properties? You said you've got 11 rental properties. How is this affecting my rental properties? Have I communicated with my residents? Have I opened up the lines of communication to talk to them, to start setting it up? And okay, now I've got I took all of New York City out. Now I'm focused and I'm drilled in. And then it's like, okay, do I try to help them get help? Whether it's through the churches, through the government, and start working the solution. Don't worry about the problem. Okay, you're not working. I get it. Now let's go towards solutions. Let's go to a payment plan. Let's go to this.
Right.
Go to the solutions. And I think that is where a lot of people, and it's hard. I understand when you hear all this news and drama, it's very easy because, again, news sells drama. Right. They don't sell good news. Exactly. It's always bad news. That's what they do. That's how people are glued to it, because you're like, well, at least their life is worse than mine. I don't feel as bad now, and that's just human nature.
So I know you were an investor through the 2008 recession. Is there any story you can just provide real briefly about that time, and anything you want to share about that? One thing I've learned from my years of 2011, Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Harvey, the oil bust, SARS, H1N1. I mean, here's the thing. These dramas and catastrophes are always going to be here. Right.
They are always going to come and go, right? I remember in 2008, the world was ending. It was like all of a sudden the world is flat and we're all going to the edge, right? I mean, I remember these conversations. Right. Life as we know it will never be the same. Mm-hmm. A couple years later, it came right back, right? Then we had Hurricane Ike. Life as we know it will never be the same. It's always the end dismal. The thing is I never sold my properties, so I never really had any problems.
Right.
If I worked off of fear and said, I got to unload everything I have. Well, the thing is, you got to remember, when people lose their jobs and lose their houses, that's kind of like being what's called a contrarian investor. That's when things go on sale.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
When things go on sale in the grocery store, we stock up. Right. When our investments go on sale, we get rid of them. You think about that, it doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. That should be the time that we are going and looking for deals. And I'm not trying to say take advantage or be advantageous, but I'm just saying there's something to be said that put the right frame of mind as to what's going on.
Exactly.
Don't let what everyone else is doing sway your decision making. And I mean, look, I've had bad days, I've had really bad days, I've had horrible days, but I've had a lot of good days. But I will tell you, the things that I learned the most are from my worst, darkest days. Mm-hmm. That is actually where I got my most learning. It's like, what do they say? A diamond is made out of pressure from coal, right? It's the pressure. It's so you are going to shine if you take that information from that pressure and turn it into a lesson. And from there, you actually will excel, because my biggest successes, I can tell you without a doubt, are because of my biggest failures. And so without a doubt, I would not trade any of my failures and losses, because that's what got me to where I am today.
Right.
Awesome, Steve. I feel like there was so much gold you just delivered to us there. We kind of have to wrap up the show here. I know you got to go. I'm curious, we have a lot of young families on this show who are just starting out. They want to get started in real estate. I know you've had this wind-about journey of going through wholesaling, flipping, buying your own rental properties, starting a property management business. And then even just starting from the framework of, having this stable, reliable job and not even thinking about side hustles or anything like that. What do you recommend now, meeting a young couple who may, be a little ambitious and want to start something? What do you tell that general couple?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's asked me very often. What I tell people, first of all, is you have to create your goals. So you have to understand where are your goals and where's your end destination as a result of owning real estate. Mm-hmm. After you know where your goals are, then you create the strategy to get you to the goal. So for example, if we said that we were going to go to Disneyland, and I said, what does your life look like as a result when you guys retire? explain to me, paint me a picture of what your life looks like. Well, I want $10,000 in passive income a month. I want $5 million in assets. I want this. I want that. Okay, that's the picture, right? Now we have tangibles with numbers. And I ask, what date does that happen? Like date, like, October 3rd, 2040. Okay, now we know when we're going, because if you don't have an end date and you don't have a destination, I can't give you directions anywhere. Right. So that's like you coming to me saying, hey, Steve, can I get directions? And I'm going to say, sure. Where are you going?
Right.
And you're going to go, I don't know. I just want to go somewhere. And I'm going to go, well, then just get on the freeway and go, because I can't help you.
Right.
So a lot of times people get on the freeway, meaning they buy a deal with no goal and no destination. Mm-hmm. The deal is the strategy, but it's got to get you closer to the destination. A lot of times we get a deal because somebody said it was a good deal, or our lack of knowledge tells us maybe that's a good deal. And as a result of that, we buy it. And then we go, I wonder what strategy this goes under. Like, is this a buy and hold? Is this making me money? Is this not? Not really sure. And I'm going, well, is it getting you closer to your goal or further from your goal? And they're like, don't know. Never thought of that. A lot of times as entrepreneurs, we are like ready, shoot, aim. Mm. And we do not think of where we're going. Mm-hmm. So again, you've got to think of the strategy. The strategy is what types of properties get you to those goals. If you said, I've got 20 years and I want properties that are going to double in value, and I want this and I want that. Okay, now you know. And I would say, okay, is cash flow important to you? Not saying you want it or don't want it. Is it a non-negotiable? Mm. Like, do you have a job? Yeah, I've got a job. Is $300 a month going to make or break your life? No. Okay, so the cash flow is not the most important thing. It's good to have, but it's not the most important thing. If you said, I want properties that are going up at least 15% year over year in value, whatever that number is, then I would say, okay, appreciation is something that you're going to focus on. And then maybe the next thing could be, I want to get 10% equity capture when I buy this. I want some form of a deal. Okay. Mm. What cities offer those type of deals? Mm-hmm. Houston doesn't. Maybe New York does. Maybe, so now you go, okay, what cities have the right strategy to get me to the goal? See, a lot of times people buy properties where they live because they go, oh, I live here, so I've got to buy a deal. But gee, I can only own one house in New York City, so this isn't really helping me.
Right.
Wrong strategy. You're on the wrong freeway. Mm-hmm. With technology today, I go off of the company I work with, Mind. They're in 16 markets. Mm-hmm. So with technology and software, you can find deals anywhere in the country, right? And use team to leverage them. The biggest challenge we have as manager of owning our rentals is we are so busy trying to be busy, we don't understand that it's got to be a team. Mm-hmm. Team is the key to success. You will fail if you try to do it on your own. I know, because I tried. I see many people that get pushed onto the wayside of the highway because they fail on their own, because you have two limitations when you do it on your own. Number one is your time, and you're not going to get any more of that. And number two is your knowledge. Mm. There's no way that you are going to be able to know everything you need to know about law, property code, fair housing, discrimination, accounting, property management. You're not going to know all these things enough to be an expert. You may be able to for one or two properties, but if you want to scale to 20 to 30 for your goal, you're going to have to get team, and you've got to build that team as the foundation. You don't build the house and then go, I think I'll get the foundation at house 10.
Right.
It doesn't work that way, because normally the house crumbles and you lose everything in a lawsuit, or something like coronavirus where you don't have enough capital set aside, and now it all implodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Steve, awesome. If people want to hear more about you, get to know more about you, I know you have podcasts, other ways to contact you. How can people reach out to you?
Sure. So the podcast show is called The Mindful Investor. It's a new one, MYND, Mindful Investor, and it's on iTunes, Spotify. We get people from brand new investors all the way up to very, very experienced. And what we talk about there is mostly not just their wins, but I want to know their challenges and their losses, because that's how we all learn, is by understanding how they overcome those. Mm-hmm. We also have a Facebook group. It's called the Mastermind, MYND, Mastermind Real Estate Investment Club on Facebook. You can join there. There's people from Bigger Pockets. There's all over the world, investors talking, especially with the coronavirus. Everyone's talking about what's happening. And obviously they can follow me on Instagram. It's Rozenberg Steve, Rozenberg Steve. And they can follow me on Facebook, Steve Rosenberg. And if they go to my website, steverosenberg.com, maybe you can give them all links for all these. They can buy my book on Amazon, and happy to, if somebody has questions, they can send me DMs. I'm pretty good at getting back to people.
What's the title of your book?
He has 7 of them, right?
No. I've written ebooks. I've gotten a lot of ebooks, but this is the one that I wrote recently. It's called Building an Empire, Failing Our Way to Millions. It's on Amazon. Cool. If you go to my website, steverosenberg.com, you can find it there. But it's my story. It's story of buying the properties, the 9/11. I mean, everything we talked about.
Nice.
It's in that book. It's a lot of people tell me, they're like, man, I cannot believe that you're still standing after everything you went through. And I tell people, I'm like, that's why I'm standing, because I went through it. So,
right. Steve, can I ask one last question? I know you got to go, but you've written a book, you've gone through this incredible journey, and you're still a full-time commercial airline pilot. Can you give us like your daily ritual of how you do it all?
Man, so I get up at 4 a.m. every day. I go to the gym. I get up in the morning. I've recently learned how to meditate for like 10 minutes. I write my I am statements. I schedule my day out. I leave for the gym. I'm at the gym at 5, from 5 to 7. Then I get home. Then I start doing podcast shows, writing things up, doing interviews, working on my stuff. And I'm very, very focused and intentional when I do stuff.
Wow.
And I live on my calendar.
Nice.
And I'm learning, I'm like everybody else, but I'm learning a lot more to say no than say yes. Mm-hmm. So I really have to ask. And one of the things I have that is something that anybody should think about getting is I have a personal assistant, and she's a virtual assistant. If anybody wants to know about that more, I'm happy to explain it. But that is the best thing I've ever done in my life, is have an assistant be the one to tell me yes or no if I should do something or not.
Mm.
Wow.
So your show made the cut. You should be happy.
Nice. You made it. Steve, thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been great having you on the show. Great chatting with you.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks so much. And to everyone out there watching, just, again, remember, don't let fear and emotion drive your business decisions. Be logical, and we're all going to come out the other side of this, and we'll all be better for it.
Thank you, Steve.
No problem.
Have a good one.